Welcome to our fabric store.
Welcome to our fabric store.
Welcome to our fabric store. Welcome to our fabric store.
Welcome to our Japan Public Store.
We view life through the eyes of the designer.
Who sees things not as they are, but as what they can become.
Design is where we live.
And where we can always be found.
Design moves us to see the world
from the crystal vantage points of creativity.
Design is the beast, just partially tamed.
Who breaks rules and mocks tradition and rebuilds with inspiration.
We eat, we sleep, we breathe, we design.
That is who we are.
We live design.
We live design.
We live design.
Hello, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, wherever in the globe or the world you may be. It's been a rainy day here in Metro Manila, but I hope you're all keeping safe and dry. I'm Joy Alampay, Executive Director of Asia Society Philippines. Welcome to Eyes on Southeast Asia. It's our third iteration of Asia Society Philippines focused on textiles and identity. So, Eyes on Southeast Asia for this one looks to promote understanding and bridge cultures between and among peoples and countries through education, policy, technology, sustainability, and of course, culture and the arts, spanning discussions and activities beyond the surface. So today, we begin this three-part series examining textiles woven through culture and the Filipino identity, and we are very proud and privileged to do this in partnership with the SOFA Design Institute under the leadership of Miss Amina Aranas and Miss Tina Baron. Thank you very much. And we will be having a very distinguished panel tonight. Of course, the Honorable Lauren Legarda, ma'am, maraming salamat po. Professor Corinne Romabiles, and our Asia 21 fellow, Miss Anya Lim. They will take us on an enriching and insightful conversation of weaves and how they go beyond simple woven materials, textiles, and aesthetics. So today, we lay ground and dive into our roots and the manifestations of our identity as Filipinos through our deeply embedded culture of textiles. So, helping us tonight navigate the topic is our host for this three-part series, Miss Carla May Leonor, Chairperson for Interior Design of the SOFA Design Institute. Carla, welcome and thank you, please.
Hello, good evening, Miss Joy. Thank you for that. All right, so like Miss Joy has welcomed everyone. So good evening. Welcome to Asia Society Philippines Eyes on Asia series. Like Miss Joy mentioned, this program aims to highlight and promote the understanding of an Asian country or a region through its policies, culture, and local arts by opening up these kinds of engaging conversations and activities in order to discover what is beyond the surface of topics, issues that are relevant and meaningful to our times now. So my name again is Carla Leonor, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Eyes on Southeast Asia. This is a three-part series developed and produced by Asia Society Philippines in partnership and collaboration with SOFA Design Institute. Here, we are going to highlight the diverse and rich culture of Southeast Asia through real conversations with our creatives, change makers, and experts in the field. So starting the series is our first episode where we are going to spotlight the Filipino identity and textiles woven through our culture. So join us in this conversation as we explore the rich culture of textiles and its link in identity as an individual, as part of a community, and as part of a nation in a Southeast Asian region. So let me introduce to you our esteemed speakers. So first, we have the co-founder and managing director of Anthill Fabric Gallery, Miss Anya Lim. She's also known as the Princess Ant and recognized as one of Asia's 21 young leaders who are playing a huge role during the pandemic by providing and helping out our countrymen. So Anthill Fabric Gallery is a social and cultural enterprise working to support sustainable livelihood among Filipino artisan communities through circular and contemporary design, as well as capacity building through community enterprise development. With over a decade of experience, Anya's immersion began as a volunteer with international nonprofits where she did the work on resource mobilization, advocacy communications as well. Anya finished her master's in communications for social change at the University of Queensland in Australia, and as it is reflected in her work, is very much passionate about community entrepreneurship and showcasing our handicraft traditions for women economic empowerment. Hello, Anya.
Hello, Carla. It's such a pleasure to be here today and be part of this conversation. Good afternoon to everyone who's tuned in.
All right. Thanks, Anya. So the next we have is Dr. Corinne Romabiles. She is a professor of art and communication who has long been trying to pursue Filipino design thinking. She is the creative director of Studio Ideanale, a studio and consultancy group that has been fascinated with projects with a mix of fine arts with the hard sciences. Idianale is based in Manila and is a Philippine art and science lab. So her experiments with design, business, and technology perspectives has helped her with her ideation process as she has pioneered Philippine branding methodology. So Idianale's creative approach is likewise anchored in the principles of nation branding. So this is the business strategy that we are going to learn more about today. Now, Dr. Corina Mabilis is also a faculty member at SOFA Design Institute and the Asian Institute of Management. She trained in visual merchandising, branding, and advertising at the Fashion School of the Academy of Arts in San Francisco, California. And with her specialization in retail atmospherics and window displays for the Philippine souvenir stores, she has worked for various brands that includes Thesaurus Inc. and DTI One Town One product project. So, with her doctorate in Philippine Studies, major in international relations from the University of the Philippines, and her degree in art studies, major in art history, she was able to pioneer a study on the history of the Philippine souvenir store and Filipiniana displays. And now her interest in cultural diplomacy and nation branding, which began in Italy when she was studying theology and philosophy at the Pontificia Università della Santa Croce, Rome, has brought her today with us campaigning for the importance of Filipino branding and identity that's tied to the pursuit of nation branding. Good evening, Dr. Corinne.
Hi, Carla and Anya. I'm so happy to be here. And you're really my best friend after all that description of me. And all I really want to do is to help out people, in one way or another, to really love being Filipino. That's basically my advocacy. And I'm happy to be here this afternoon with very distinguished guests. We have Anya and Ma'am Lauren Legarda. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Corinne. So having said that, of course, we are honored to have Senator Lauren Legarda today with us, who's the Deputy Speaker for the Philippine House of Representatives. She represents also the Lone District of the province of Antique. And prior to her election to the current position in May 2019, she was a three-term member of the Philippine Senate, where she chaired the Committees on Finance, Foreign Relations, and Climate Change. She has authored so many laws aimed at improving the lives of Filipinos and promoting inclusive, sustainable, and resilient development. She is currently also the UNDRR Global Champion for Resilience, the UNFCCC National Adaptation Plan Champion, a commissioner for the Global Commission on Adaptation, the Climate Vulnerable Forum Ambassador for Parliaments, and the Women Political Leaders Global Ambassador for Disaster Risk Reduction, Climate Change, and Environment. So obviously her inspiring advocacy in environmental protection has earned her global recognition. She has been recognized as a global leader for tomorrow by the World Economic Forum and a UN Environment Program laureate. She was chosen as one of the summit champions for the high-level CVF Virtual Summit held in November 2018 and one of the climate defenders chosen for the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow. A cum laude graduate of the University of the Philippines, National Defense College of the Philippines, top-notcher, a graduate of the Armed Forces of the Philippines Command and General Staff College, Senator Legarda is a reserve officer of the Philippine Air Force as well with the rank of a colonel. She was conferred the degree Doctor of Laws honoris causa by the University of the Philippines. And through her efforts to strengthen the bilateral relations with other countries, Senator Legarda was bestowed with the title of Knight in the French National Order of the Legion of Honor, Knight in the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic, and the Award of Distinction by the European Union. So we are very much honored today that we are joined by the Honorable Senator Lauren Legarda. Good evening po.
Fight challenges in technology. Finally, I'm joining you. Yes, backstage, you knew what I had to go through just to join you here because I'm a great admirer of course, the work that Anya does, and I would like to know more and see how SOFA and my office could work together, and all of you, whether it's Corinne, Anna, Anya or Carla, and many of those who are presently online, you're actually implementing a law that I authored 20 years ago, and that's the Tropical Fabric Law. Perhaps not many people know there's already existing legislation. We just need to implement it further. But I know we'll have a chance to answer those questions. I'm happy to join you on this rainy afternoon. Women with shared advocacy, that's great. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Senator Legarda. So, shall we jump right into it? Okay, so we do have a few photos here in our slides that we'd like to share with you as we go along in this conversation. If you do have questions, just type it in, and our team will try to get it back to us so we can include it in the discussion. All right, so let's talk about Filipino branding and identity and how also our textiles are ingrained in that fabric. So I'd like to start with Dr. Korean. If you can describe to us what do you mean by Filipino identity, because I understand a lot of people would seem to know it, but is there more to it?
Well, that is it's a loaded question. And well, it's just that I really got lucky that I was mentored by, experts in Philippine identity, Philippine art, UP Diliman. So I've been looking at this Filipino identity for 14 years. So as you had mentioned earlier, Carla, I had this thesis on the history of the Philippine souvenir store and Filipiniana displays, where Dr. Ruben Cañete helped me traverse very long timelines, almost 100 years of Filipino representations in what was initially world ethnographic displays, no? And so we looked at what they call it, the power relations, no? Like who dictates what Filipino representation should be in these displays. And so we looked at how these displays had evolved in St. Louis, Missouri, also the world fairs, no? When you had those ethno-linguistic groups displayed, during that period. And also during the time of Imelda Marcos, that was also, we discussed that, how she was kind of endorsing Filipiniana and all that. And then I reached the point when we were actually looking at commercial spaces in SM Cultura or say Rustan's, because I am also like a freelance visual merchandiser, and for a time I worked with Tesoros, no? And you were asking about Filipino identity. Since I had to traverse all these types of locations, no, from archival research to field work in Quiapo, sa ilalim ng tulay ng Quiapo and all that, I was trying to figure out what Filipino-ness is. No, I am really not an anthropologist, or I am also not a historian, but I got lucky that in my Philippine studies experience, I was looking at the Filipino from, like a very 3D perspective. So that's anthropological, historical, political, economic, also like sociological. So I had that very like a kaleidoscope opportunity, and then it ended supposedly with a bang when I majored in international relations. No? So I was trying to figure out what we are substantially as a people. What is that identity from all these aspects? And we know that identity is something to do with our uniqueness, our character as a people, what marks us as Filipinos. And so in the beginning, I was looking at it. That's why I can relate to our topic today, although I'm not an expert in textiles like Anya or Senator Legarda. I was looking at material culture and everything that was in a souvenir shop, and how these souvenirs had actually evolved from our material culture. So it's very interesting even to visit a souvenir store like Tesoros or SM Cultura, because you see there, our heritage, but they've changed their look. No? So Damian Domingos, Tipos del País, for example, are now the dolls. Those little Barbie dolls, those little dolls of Filipinos and all that. No? So that was how I actually began this journey of my wanting to know what Filipino-ness is about. And yun na, so today I'm teaching a course on Philippine branding, and it's very heavy on my foundation, in the foundations of Philippine art history. You know? And well, by far it's been receiving good reviews, and I'm happy that more and more Filipinos are interested about Philippine art history. You know, as we look deeper into this whole idea of what Philippine representation is, and then today it has developed into this idea of Philippine branding. Since I'm in the Asian Institute of Management, so it has actually acquired a business aspect. So right there, that was my journey as a Philippine identity researcher. You could say it's a work in progress because our culture is so rich. Our culture continues to evolve and develop, I must say. And there's just so much to converse about. And it's very important that we lead our young people into the future. Accepting, not just accepting or being resigned about being Filipino, but really appreciating it and loving our Filipino identity.
Thanks,
So it's
Prof,
basically
for
that.
that.
Yeah,
I
thank
was
you.
curious though. I was curious about how this is defined. And do you think that we have defined it clearly just yet?
Well, we have a lot of geniuses in the academe, I must say, and the University of the Philippines and many other universities had begun with that discourse. No? It's just that maybe since I've been studying for quite a number of years because it's demanded of teachers, like your ranking will not get any higher if you say don't write in journals, or if you don't pursue your thesis or your dissertation. So it's just that I'm lucky to have absorbed, consumed so much of concepts about being Filipino from an anthropological perspective, as I was saying. So that's Felipe Landa Hocano, for example. He was talking about the Filipino value system, and I'm trying to get into the Filipino consciousness as this expert anthropologist had studied it. No? So I really dive into these books that they made, or at the same time you have a very political figure in Renato Constantino who also talked about Filipino identity. And then there's Felipe De Leon today of the NCCA. I think, my background is very, it's very much in the academic perspective of defining what the Filipino is. And in Philippine studies, there is a joke that that some of the founders of Philippine studies would say. They think to themselves that it was actually a mistake on their part to have created a course, because they say that it's highly complex and it's even problematic. No, and so I think that became a challenge for me, to really find out what the definition of being Filipino is about. But at the end of the day, I go to a textbook and I really look at, a very straightforward definition, and it says a mark of an individual, the character and uniqueness of, say, a people, in terms of their history and all that. After all the reflection and all the research, I would like to convince myself that we actually do have an identity. Even with our colonial layering, shall we say, and we see that it's based on experience, it's tacit knowledge, and it's just that it's sad that it has really not been so articulated today in a way that we actually enjoy our being Filipino and, like be comfortable in our skin. Mainly because that articulation still needs to be encouraged, in not just the academe, but like in everyday lingo. Maybe we see the newspapers. So yeah, I'm actually I'm an optimist, no, and I would really like to pursue this because I suppose we also know that we also have like a harsh history, in these slides actually are showing some of the archival research that I came across, in they're written in Spanish. Some of them, Graciano Lopez Reina was complaining back in the late 1800s that we were not visually represented well in the ethnographic fairs in Madrid in 1887 and in Barcelona in 1888. And he said, like, well, I read it in Spanish because I understand a bit of Spanish. And I was thinking he was actually the first visual merchandiser because he was commenting about how the lights weren't so bright, and it was landing on, it was focusing on in a very, sad way on the clothes that were brought to these ethnographic displays in Madrid and Barcelona. And he was saying that the baskets, coming from, like the north of the Philippines, weren't exactly, the best baskets or the best rice grains. And we're talking about 1888, in Barcelona, and he was complaining to a tribunal. And not so many of us know that we were actually seen as some kind of savages. And well, we can't really blame, circumstances at the time because these are historical, historical circumstances that we can't also, condemn today because we're already, we are already with human rights laws and all that, right? So I guess it's really just a reflection about what we can do to be what we can do to go better, to be better, in being Filipino by maybe studying. So I'd always say study pa more, to my students in Philippine art history, in multimedia arts, for example, they start to represent Filipino-ness now in, with using Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. And I would tell them to, like, use their imagination, but use their imagination well, because we really had, like a rocky, not easy. It was like it was a problematic history in terms of visual representation. In 1887 in Madrid, 1888, and then again in 1904 in St. Louis, Missouri, when they put the Filipinos there, and then they say, they are in a zoological or like a zoo, like we were curiosities, or like we weren't exactly given the right dignity, as as a people, because they thought that we still lived in trees and all that. Of course, the lenses at the time were different because it was the age of industrialization was really new, and nation building among countries was still new. And of course, we know that at the time, in our colonial history, there is an assertion of the colonial power. So I'd always tell my students, looking back, we should be encouraged to know more who we are as a people, and instead of critiquing, complaining about our past, to be very optimistic and be grateful to those Filipinos who were displayed, whether they're like Igorots or Aitas, that they actually did bring to Spain. Some of them even died, according to Graciano Lopez Reina and Jose Rizal. They felt so bad. And in St. Louis, Missouri, the same, like the Igorot village and all that. So I tell my students, instead of being, just heartbroken about this, the oppression that we experienced, do better, and be very inventive. about how we can present our people in a very dignified way. And historians would actually say that, Alice Guillermo, who is an expert in Philippine art history, should say ours is a folk culture, a folk culture, and we need to appreciate that, whether that's fisher folk or agricultural or farmers. We shouldn't feel bad that that is some kind of I don't know, like a retrogression or some kind of poor representation of Filipino because we're agricultural, or we're fisher folk. But she says that try to use the imagination so that we bring that to some kind of sublime, meaningful, and a very like worthy sort of identity. So even a nobility, shall we say, because our people are very hardworking. Whether they're farmers or they're fisher folk, but that also has its very idyllic representation, and I think we should be very welcoming of all the positive ways by which we are represented. But then again, to review and to have that also that critique, the critic, to be a critic. Now that's an exercise in Philippine art history and art history. So we define by looking at the whatever is represented in historical way, but we also do some kind of theorizing about that visual representation that we're looking, and then critiquing it, and maybe, and this is very highly encouraged in art, have some kind of art practice, whether that's photography or digital cinema. But we always ingrained in our multimedia students, for example, in Mapua University, that they should have their good grasp of what we are as a historical people, as a culture, as a society. So basically that.
I love that idea of getting involved, right? And that actually is followed by another question, which I'd also like to ask Anya about. This entire definition of Filipino identity, and of course the idea of oppression. We don't want people telling us what that is specifically for us. So, but given that it is necessary for us also to build our nation branding, right? You have to know who we are. Does that limit you as a creative in any way? Like when you think about, oh, okay, I have to have a Filipino identity.
Personally, for me as a creative, I do not see it as a limitation, but as a source of inspiration of what I could become or what my platform could become. I think based on what Dr. Karine has shared, it's an evolving identity, right? Founded by values, by way of life, by unique traits and characteristics. And it changes over time, and there's layers to an identity. So if you will define your work as a creative based on this complex mix of identity, then it should also be evolving. Your work should manifest the evolution of these identities as well, or this representation of how beautiful and intricately they change or they evolve. So I don't think it should limit us, but it should be a source of inspiration, a source of innovation, and a source of collaboration, because there's also a lot of value in being able to learn about how other people or how other creatives define or interpret Filipino identity.
Thanks, Anya. And I like also how that connects to everything, right? And I hope all the other creatives out there do share the same perspective do. I'd like to turn this over to Senator Lauren Legarda with regards to nation branding. Of course, you're very much in the nucleus of things. With nation branding, are there current developments in the government that is really pushing for this? I know we have bills being placed But can you tell us more about that?
Thank you for that, Carla. But first of all, may I answer the first question, which is so interesting, which is what is the Filipino identity? Because I think all policy that we do and all laws and resolutions that I have authored in my 18 years in the Senate and first term in the House of Representatives emanates on who we are and what I believe we are as a people. And answering the first question of what is the Filipino identity, I think and I believe that we can glean much from our identity as Filipinos from both our tangible and intangible heritage. And that is why my passion and determination and persistence to document them, to conserve them, to support its archiving, and to try to strengthen the understanding and appreciation and recognition of all these kinds of heritage. Traditional textiles, for example, that is just one kind of an intangible heritage. And we always say these are the ties that bind. Like there are such diverse cultures, more than 110 ethno-linguistic groups, more than 130 even Philippine languages all over the country. And we're just speaking about language. We're just speaking about traditional textiles. And of the 110 ethno-linguistic groups, they also have subgroups of textiles as well. So this form part of what our intangible culture is all about. And we have culinary heritage, we have the rituals, we have songs and dance of our indigenous people. And that's just our indigenous people. And what about the monuments? What about the artifacts and all the tangible heritage in our buildings, whether they are within the years of our colonial, the colonizers, or even way back before 500 years ago. In fact, we're celebrating this year our quincentennial celebration of the arrival, first arrival of Europeans on Philippine shores. Definitely, as we've always said, not a discovery of the Philippines, but a ceremonial attribution of the first circumnavigation of the world, of which the Philippines is a great part of, because the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan, supported by the Spanish royalty on Philippine shores, had signaled the Philippines' very essential participation in the first circumnavigation of the world. Now, back to the issue of who is the Filipino and how are we able to learn who the Filipino is. I really strongly believe that our culture, as I said, both tangible and intangible, reflects who we are. And how do we learn more about this? What are the policies that we've done? Well, I hope that after the lockdown, you're able to visit if you've not yet, because it's been there for more than 10 years. One example is the first and only textile gallery in the Philippines, which I envisioned and supported more than 10 years ago, is the Hibla ng Lahing Filipino in the National Museum of Anthropology. It started with a very small room in the Fine Arts Building and finally transferred to the National Museum of Anthropology. And that National Museum of Anthropology has the first discovered textile in the Philippines, which is the Banton cloth. And this was found, of course, in Banton in Romblon. They're showing some photos. Okay, this was in the first room that I worked on with Dr. Ana Labrador and Jeremy Barnes when Queen Sofia arrived, 7, 8, maybe 10 years ago. And they were very impressed, and so was I, with the Hood Hood chant of the Ifugaos who came to Manila to share with them their indigenous culture through the Hood Hood. But that is just one of the many activities we've done to perpetuate and show and conserve our culture, and for people to see this culture. We had started the lecture series of in the National Museum, And we started other galleries as well. Aside from material culture and textiles, the Gamaba Gallery is so important. What is the Gamaba? I'm sure you all know that. That's Manlilikha ng Bayan Awards. These are the national living treasures. Many of them have passed on, like Lang Dulay of South Cotabato. One is a more than 100 years old, and she's been in the news. I'm sorry. Wang Od is not a Gamaba, but she's a Dangal ng Haraya awardee of the NCCA, because it's a world of a lot of difference between a Dangal and a Gamaba. The Gamaba Gallery houses the Manlilikha ng Bayan awardees, or our national living treasures. One of them is Magdalena Gamayo of Pinili, Ilocos Norte. The others would be our brass makers. I can't recall now all the names of our Gamaba awardees. Some of them have gone. And we have tried to document them. I think most of you have seen the documentary that I started since 2015, and that's Dayao. We say Dayao, our knowledge, our pride, because Dayao means, in different Philippine languages, it means to take pride in, whether it's in Visayan or in any language. The commonality of what that word means is to take pride in. So we document Philippine indigenous and traditional culture through Dayao. So the Gamaba Gallery, the Hibla ng Lahing Filipino, and this Hibla has been set up as well, not just in Metro Manila. We have it in the Habol Panay in Iloilo, and we have also a Hibla Textile Gallery in the National Museum in Vigan. And soon we will have in Butuan, in Zamboanga, and also a sub-museum in San Jose, in Antique, and Kiangan in Ifugao as well. So this is just for textiles. But in terms of languages, for example, with the KWF, we had Endangered Languages Summit a few years ago. You know, these activities do not get to the news because it may not be something as interesting, perhaps, to go viral in social media or to hit the front pages. But I believe this is so important because it reflects the Filipino identity. And we have more than 130 languages, 110 ethno-linguistic groups. And many of them are lost, endangered, or dying. What do we know? I just know basic languages of may Kinaraya, Hiligaynon, Chabacano, Ilocano, but there are more than 100. And if we lose this, what will happen to those who speak it or those who never heard them speak it? And to be able to understand them, we must document them. So that's another project I am doing with the NCCA. We also have language markers. Where did these languages emanate from? How did they start? Who started it? And where were these languages written on? Were they written on paper, on stone, on wood? It would be such interesting research. So I'm only speaking about language here. I'm only speaking about textiles here. But there's a great wealth out there of much, much more, both tangible and intangible culture, which we've tried to capture in the documentary Dayao. Let me just state that as I speak to you now, more than 100 years ago, our national hero also probably spoke to Adolphe Bastian about it. Who is Adolphe Bastian? He is the founder of the Berlin Ethnological Museum. And why do I know that? Because I found the collection of Dr. Jose Rizal of his textiles, whether it's the ikat or even piña cloth of a male and a female, in the archives of the Berlin Ethnological Museum. And since 2013, I've been working with them to be able to bring it home to the Philippines. And we're almost there, except that during the pandemic, of course, when COVID leaves us, then we will be able to bring it home and have a special gallery, but just loaned to us by the Berlin Ethno Museum. Because Rizal was a collector of textiles, and his first gift to Adolf Bastian, one of his closest European friends, German, were textiles made out of pineapple, piña, and banana, and abaca as well. So is it not so interesting that we women, maybe there are men online I can't see, are speaking about textiles, and our national hero and his European friends probably discussed it as well and exchanged gifts. And that, I think, makes us realize that textiles form a large part of who we are as Filipinos, and reflects the Filipino identity. The fact that our own national hero had collected them and gifted them to a very important anthropologist or ethnographer. So what are we doing in government? I mentioned earlier, I think it was backstage, we have the tropical fabric law. That was one of the laws that I authored in my first term yet, 1998. It was enacted, I think, 2002 or 3, before the end of my first term. Of course, as you know, I'm the principal author of the act strengthening the National Museum of the Philippines. There are many more laws. I could go on and read all the laws: the National Cultural Heritage Act, the Gabaldon School Building Conservation Act, so many existing laws. And the challenge is, first, for everyone to know that these laws exist, and second, for government or the executive department who's mandated to implement it to actually both fund it and follow it per their mandate. So there's so much wealth in our discussion here, and I'm glad that SOFA had taken the initiative to speak about the Filipino identity and what government is doing. Insofar as my role as a policymaker and lawmaker is concerned, I think I really put a clear brand on culture, on heritage, on our Filipino identity, to the best of my ability in my 18 years in the Senate and even in the House of Representatives. And when there is any single infraction, any kind of disrespect for our culture, I'm one of the first to say, hey, that's you're infringing on Filipino identity, and we must fight for that. So I don't want to hug too much of the time, but there's just so much to say. Let me just say that as we celebrate 500 years of the quincentennial of the landing of the Europeans in the Philippines, this forum is very apt, because we are discussing who we are as a people before the so-called colonizers came to our shores. And we see that we are so rich, we are so wealthy, and we must be proud. We must be proud. We must sustain that pride in who we are. And how can the millennials or the young people, and Anya, yeah, I think all of you are millennials here. I'm the oldest maybe in the group. How can you help convince everybody that we are indeed wealthy as a nation? And so I never accept it when they say you're a poor developing country. Oh no, we're a wealthy nation of brilliant people. All we need to know is to look back at the past, to appreciate who we are in the present, so that we would know where we're going in the future by appreciating the Filipino identity, both in our tangible and intangible heritage.
I super love everything that you said, Senator Legarda. It's people like you, people in position, people in power who are trailblazers. You are very much inspiring to all of us, and it really helps us to push, this intention to, have this front and center. So of course we want to get education involved. We want to get people involved and communities involved, like what Anya is doing. And I like also how you were mentioning that when we were looking at the culture in past and the present, textile has really influenced our culture, and also the other way around. And we do have one question from Clarissa Delgado, and this is something also that we can direct to Anya or Senator Legarda. She's asking about if you guys have a perspective on our identity, and if our fabrics tells us anything about what could bind us. You were partly already addressing this earlier, right? With our
Yes.
culture and with gift giving, the act of that. So, but beyond the lines drawn on a map by foreigners, that was the question of Clarissa. If the in the last centuries is there a common identity as a country that has in itself had an effect on our textiles?
Should I think I mentioned it briefly earlier that traditional textiles are ties that bind. It links us to the past and to the present and brings us together in our diversity, in our diverse cultures, which no matter how diverse, we see a commonality. And it bridges generations from our national hero more than a century ago to the present generation. We see whether it's the Abel Iloco, for example, or even of the Hablon, or even the woven materials of IP groups in Mindanao, but you will see a commonality in terms of ikat, for example. And even, let's say, in Mindanao, if we see a Tiboli and a Mandaya, sometimes you can interchange them because it's very similar. So they are vastly different, but you can see also a great commonality. And I think that's the beauty in traditional textiles, because it binds us, it also differentiates us, and that is how rich we are. And that's, as I say, and that's only one facet of a whole gamut of what is our culture all about. And culture would include biodiversity. That's part of culture. Our flora and fauna. And don't get me starting to talk about the environment because it will be endless. Yes. And so that's my long answer to Clarissa's question. Hello, Clarissa. Yeah.
Thanks, Senator. And I'd like to bounce this back to Anya. You are
Yes.
in the middle of it all with the communities. Can you tell us more about the current level of appreciation or response to textiles that you see now, in relation also to the previous question also of Clarissa?
Yes, yes. Just to answer Clarissa's question, actually, it's very interesting how much Anthill has become a learning space for us also. I mean, we're all learners here. And recently, we had a post about our binakol pattern, and we learned that um, despite it being part of our materials culture, and despite it being part of our weaving traditions and our cultural identity, it also has had a lot of influences from other countries. And it, like ikat, it's a pattern that has multiple languages in other countries. So in terms of like the evolution and the diversity of our identity throughout centuries, it still is manifesting in the language using our textiles. Senator Legarda mentioned that it also somehow is interconnected to our biodiversity. And our weavers traditionally use their textiles as an expression of storytelling to share their way of life. It's a canvas for them. So the embroideries of the Itneg community, for example, or the different patterns in the Cordillera region is a reflection of their way of life. And this also evolves along the way. Even the colors used has a lot of influences throughout the centuries in the way they express it through textile art. In terms of your second question about what's the current appreciation right now of our textile industry, obviously we see it left and right. There's a booming, rising number of brands really promoting and advocating for the use of our local textiles and the revival of the weaving industry. And I think personally, this is something that's really been brought about by the Love Local, Support Local movement. And then until we also leveraged on that, we wanted to nurture the power of identity and pride, and be able to give a platform where people can wear their tribe with pride, as we say, and wear who they are as a Filipino people. But I'd also like to reference the appreciation from the fact that there are a lot of designers who really took the risk in exploring the use of our textiles in contemporary design. If we did not make this relevant to the market or the generation of today, people will not be open to the idea of wearing it. So in the past, it was deemed as baduy or uncool to wear, right? But now, because of the creativity and the innovation that designers have been doing in terms of the textile application, it's already cool to wear. And some would even argue that it may also be like a status symbol. It's been made something that's accessible for everyday weave wearing. But to also give another perspective to things, I think what brought about the shift in terms of appreciation, not just in terms of the customers or of who wear the weaves, but also younger weavers enticed to actually learn the craft, is because the elders are much willing to actually pass on the tradition to the younger generation. There's an enabling environment now for the elders to actually see the potential of this craft and pass it on to a younger weaver. In the past, this is something that they do as a side hustle when the industry was close to its death. But right now, they see it and claim it as a profession, and weavers, younger weavers, weave with pride. So there's a simultaneous shift that's happening, which has economic impacts, but also cultural pride amongst the weave wearers and the weavers themselves.
Yes. I see that, I see that happening. And it's because of organizations like Anthill, who's bringing, these crafts and these, traditions to a digital platform. That's how we are able to see all of these now. And it's becoming more relevant to our times, like you mentioned. But I know this conversation can go the other route, right? There are pros and cons to commercializing, to the commercialization of these, of these textiles. Can you tell us, in your perspective, do you see any pros and cons in relation to the growing appreciation of these indigenous weaves? I saw that you recently posted about a brand, yes, international brand who is using our patterns to produce, garments. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so that's been very controversial, but also has been a huge, huge humbling learning experience for us in Anthill. I must admit that we were triggered as a brand, and because it's largely our advocacy to protect our weavers and their livelihood. And then throughout the discourse, we have learned that despite our ownership of it being part of our culture and our identity, there's also a lot of influence in the binakol weave, the opt art influence in the binakol weave. So it's hard to claim ownership because it's something that's also existing in different cultures and different countries. But it's a perfect case study of a con or of a threat that could possibly affect our indigenous weaving traditions. To realize that patterns without protection can be digitally printed. And it's actually happened twice this year. Early this year in February, I reached out to Senator Lauren because there were also counterfeit weaves coming from China of printed Cordillera patterns. So with the rise of the demand for our weaving traditions, there might also be, opportunists, capitalists that could take advantage of these beautiful patterns and commercially print them. And given that it's very difficult for us to claim ownership of these patterns without proper policies, archiving and documentation, and accessible tools and processes, education to our weavers who actually have these rights, then how can we protect it? It's an open-ended question. So cultural appropriation is a huge threat, but also with the rising brands, there's also a threat of misuse if we are not responsible brands properly inquiring about the limitations of the use of certain patterns, especially those of heritage textiles and ceremonial fabrics. So I think the challenge there, which we largely push for in Antil, is really consumer education, but also continuing education as brands and as designers. If we did not post that, we wouldn't also learn from our community. We don't claim to be experts in terms of textile knowledge, and obviously there's so much we have to learn in this space, but that post allowed us to have open discourse and allowed us to also to introduce the value of our binakol to the Portuguese brand. And in that way, when they responded to us, we learned that, they were very much open to collaborating with us in promoting the binakol story and the binakol view. So there's really so much more need for us to really amplify our storytelling and put it out in the world, that we have a weaving culture in the Philippines. But in terms of the pros, just to balance it off, there's a lot of good things, and there's a lot of potential, obviously, with the revival of the weaving industry. For one, I feel like it's going to really provide sustainable livelihood to communities, and this is like this huge promise of cultural continuity, with younger weavers being drawn to really learning the craft more. In fact, in other communities, we have male young weavers who are wanting to actually grow their skills in weaving and learn intricate patterns. There's this huge demand, and this huge appreciation of our weaves will also facilitate and foster innovation and collaboration among textile designers, fashion designers, in whatever way we can elevate our weaving culture. And I think there's also potential and promise of the need for us to really be able to digitalize archiving and documentation of the stories and the values of our patterns. I also feel that down the line, we will invest, and I hope we do invest in research and development and really grow the potential of using natural fibers, like what Senator Lauren mentioned, banana, piña, abaca, and use it and blend it in a way where we can actually also wear it every day.
Thank you,
I
Anya.
think it's promising.
I actually want to bring this conversation also back to Senator Lauren, because it is circling around IP rights, right? So with intellectual property, and of course, we would love to push for textiles to be known globally. And of course, in the efforts of differentiating us as a nation in Southeast Asia, how would that exactly go? Because there will always be a risk to it, right? Senator Legarda, can you share with us your perspective on this?
Well, I actually have a pending bill in the House of Representatives so that all these problems pertaining to cultural misappropriation will be solved. And I hope if this is enacted into law, then that puts that to rest. Of course, depending on its effective implementation. But I would like to look at this not so much as a problem, which sometimes becomes a problem, but really as a revival or a renaissance of an awareness on our heritage and all the weaving centers that bring about livelihood for our rural weavers, not just women, but also men. Let me just tell you a little story. Let's say in Tibiao Antique, where the dye, the natural dye never existed, and the weaving of piña had died many years ago because there was no support from government. And so all we needed to do was to build them a center for weaving and put up a natural dye center. And of course, where will the cotton come from? And so still, then we help them. We plant cotton in the neighboring municipality and set up a cotton processing center. So even during times of pandemic, after giving them a center, hand looms, natural dye center, and some resources as capital assistance to start with, and the planting of cotton and the ginning spinning machines and all of this, then you're able to tide them over, not just as a handout, but really to enliven a dying source of income and livelihood, and also bring forth the culture once again. And if we do this in every province, in every rural area where there used to be such a culture, imagine how rich it would be. There is, of course, the threat. There is, of course, the danger of misappropriation. And that is why they must also know the rights. They must know that those designs belong to them. Sometimes in their eagerness to sell their crafts, to sell their textiles, that is just done, and no attribution or recognition of their designs is done. And this is not just for foreigners. Sometimes even in the Philippines, it happens. And so a clearer understanding of what the textiles mean, the provenance of all these textiles, a clearer understanding of our indigenous peoples groups, our cultural communities, the conserved areas they belong to, their culture. So when we wear something or when we buy something, whether in stores, from designers, from traders, or even from sources in the provinces, it would help if there would be an explanation of what the textile is all about, not just pinya, abaca, cotton, but also the ethno-linguistic groups that started it, its commonality with a similar group, the distinctive quality of that fabric. And this really would give us massive education, information, and communication. And knowledge is power, they say. If our general population would know and understand the differences among the fabrics, the textiles that our ICCs or IPs produce, then hindi na sila maluloko, hindi na sila magpapaloko kasi marami silang warriors na nagpoprotekta ng kanilang hobby, ng kanilang inabel, ng kanilang inahablon. So I'm glad that there's a resurgence of interest. We must pass the necessary legislation to strengthen the protection of IP rights, not just in terms of textiles. There's much more than that. There's also, as I said, their intangible heritage. There's also their ancestral domain. But that's another subject altogether, because I think the intent of this forum today focuses on textiles or material culture.
Yes, I love, but it's really interwoven together, right? But what I'm getting here is it's really a collaborative effort between, politics, there's also in education and community organizations. I'll just like to quickly get the perspective of Dr. Karine on this, given that you are in education and that you have also mentored an organization dealing with textiles. Can you quickly tell us about that?
Actually, I've been learning a lot from Anya and Senator Legarda because my background of textiles isn't really so expansive, but I've always been an admirer of Filipino visual art. So for as long as our cloth, our textile is part of Filipino visual arts. I'm magnetized towards it, right? Like there's a lot of curiosity, and when I taught Philippine art history to multimedia art students, I'd always tell them that the beginnings of digital arts, say graphics in particular, began in, say, body arts of the IPs, tattooing, and in textiles. So I think the design center has a pattern book, and there you see the clear lines, shapes, the elements of the visual arts, seen very clearly from these patterns. So it's abstracted from the cloth, you'd see that there are symbols, there are clear graphic designs, no, that artists today can appreciate and precisely appropriate well, no? Because they're Filipino, so they should be able to, like have that sense of respect, but at the same time, that clear appreciation for graphics that were actually began, which actually were like first started by our folk artists among IPs a long time ago. So they can't claim, that just because of technology they're more superior in terms of the visual arts that they explore right now. No, it doesn't mean that it's because they're using, I don't know, like this high tech computer, their art is better. No, no, people who have been there as weavers, as people who did embroidery of these cloths, no, are also as artistic. So we shouldn't really give a lot of importance to, say, folk art or high art. I think all these Philippine art works, precisely material heritage, as Senator Ligardo was saying, should call for our attention, should call our attention, and we should give it some kind of importance and time. Yeah, because these days people are kind of distracted, with a lot of, say, media products and a lot of production with technology. Media is so it's very dominant. In multimedia, for example, there's a lot of hyper activity, with video, with digital music, with graphics, animation, and sometimes our young people seem to be losing that taste, for the ethnic and for these very, shall we say, elemental marks of being Filipino. That's why we always harp on first an appreciation of what actually constitutes a visual representation. So we go to the most basic. So we say first you look at the lines, then you look at the shapes, you look at the value, you look at the color. So as somebody was asking earlier, and I see in the chat box, what can education do to help young Filipinos today appreciate their identity? I think there should be a better assessment of how the curriculum is crafted, from like the K-12 level up to the collegiate level and the university level, so that young Filipinos will not lose precisely that taste for what is their own. I remembered an art historian, E.H. Gombrich, who says that there is actually the primacy of the primitive. And this is a European who says that we should acquire a taste for the primitive. Of course, my thesis advisor before didn't approve the word primitive, but I think I understand what E.H. Gombrich meant, as an art historian who is prominent. And he's appreciated all types of culture and their expressions in the visual arts, and it's not just about like textile, but all forms, But I think that based on what I had said and Senator Legarda, we do actually have a rich culture of textile making, that even I need to keep up with. So there's so much that we can learn from precisely our intangible and tangible culture. It's really a wealth of things that the Filipino can really be proud of. It's just that we have to have time for it.
I agree. I totally agree. Having time for it also having time to, get into education, like you were mentioning, with the importance. And that actually follows, I want to follow that with another question. This is for anyone who would like to jump in on this, because we do know that we need to get more people involved, especially the younger generation. If we don't get them involved, we can actually lose, our traditions, our craft, and our culture. So with this in mind, how would you recommend that we actually, propel the industry forward while still continuing to, pay respect to our heritage, of our textiles, our manufacturing processes, considering, of course, the deeply rooted rituals and symbols that Prof. Karim was talking about, and these traditional designs of these artisans that Anya and Senator Legarda was referring to earlier? How can we protect it, but at the same time push it forward aggressively, if I may say? Anya or Senator Legarda?
Senator, do you want to
just
go
wanted
ahead?
Yeah, just very short. I just wanted to mention that there were pending pieces of legislation that would benefit small business and even rural weavers. Let me just state House Bill 636, which seeks to provide for the development and protection of the Philippine handloom weaving industry. And I hope I could have support from all of those online, especially you are the co-panelists for this, and House Bill 639, which seeks to protect indigenous peoples and local communities' conserved areas and recognizing their contribution to biodiversity conservation. Because as we all know, textiles is just part of the larger culture. When there is harvest, there's a ritual that's part of it. There's also designs that would be relating to harvest. Let's say when somebody dies, there's a funerary textile that is used for that. So it's whether it's a happy celebration like harvest or even something like death, textiles is part of that. And there are pending bills that I filed, actually refiled from my days in the Senate in the House of Representatives. I don't see it honestly getting enacted within this Congress, but I hope and I will refile it next year after the elections. I can go on and on. There's around 12 here that I filed. But if I get lucky, I'll have more support. And I'm glad that I have like-minded advocates here online who could help push the importance of this legislation. I remember when I authored the Tropical Fabric Law in 1998 and enacted years later, I was not really mocked, but people were wondering, why is this young senator legislating about tela? Bakit tela? They wondered at the time. Remember, this was 25 years ago, and I wanted to propagate abaca, piña, and I mandated the wearing of Philippine tropical fabrics by government officials. And they're wondering, I was not just wearing it once a week. Every day, I would wear it every day until I legislated it to be such. So that was more than 20 years ago. There's still pending legislation that we need to pass, but the resurgence of the importance of textiles and the great interest now is really inspiring. And along with that, their protection and conservation and the recognition of the rights is so essential as well. Let me just note that we've created a Likhaan Resource Center with the NCCA that's in Puerto Real. It just opened with the Gamaba awardees before the pandemic in 2019. It will reopen soon when allowed in Intramuros, and that's a great place where Corinne, Anya, you can collaborate with them. I created that as my vision, funded by NCCA, but it's a space for the creative industries, for the creative economy, but focusing on traditional knowledge. Use it even virtually or physically, and it will reopen soon when the CQ is settled, when our community quarantines are settled. Anyway, there are many attempts to find real spaces, not just virtual spaces, but in this virtual world, especially you young ones, to utilize every space available and your knowledge in technology and networking to be able to bring our IPs and their crafts and their skills to a greater audience. We've done that physically before the pandemic for 5 years, bringing our weavers to destinations where there are Philippine consulates and embassies. We did that for 5 years. We called it the Hibla Traveling Exhibition. I'll stop here and listen to Anya, because when I talk about something, so I'm so passionate about it, it just takes too long sometimes. Yes,
That's
you.
okay. I always learn something from you, Senator. For me, Carla, I echo what Senator Lauren mentioned. I think there's a huge urgency necessary for us to push policy, because I feel like there's really a need for us to be able to protect our indigenous intellectual property rights and our materials culture. And policy also doesn't just stop in terms of protection. There's also a lot of need for education and accessibility of tools that we can also provide to our weavers and our indigenous communities, because there might be policy and there might be systems and processes in place to protect them, but if they're not knowledgeable of these things, and if it's not accessible to them, then they're also not able to use it. And in that sense, we're not able to really push forward without fear, I guess, if we don't have that level of protection. I also feel that that government should push for social procurement in support of weaving communities and in support of the textile industry. And I think that's what the Tropical Fiber Act did, right? To mandate that really government agencies wear our woven fabrics as uniforms. And that's really benefited our business, but also benefited our communities in terms of scale and deepening the impact in their livelihood and in the growth of their businesses as well. But I think also what's important is we have continuous education through forums like this, like what SOFA and Asia Society is hosting. I think we should always facilitate open learning spaces for discourse, where everyone can learn from each other. But also, it's very important that we put a voice to the weavers and the artisans, and we include them in the conversation, and also ask them what's important for them and how do they envision their industry and their craft and their tradition to move forward despite the changing times. There's a huge potential and opportunity in weaving tradition and technology, but we also still have to be respectful of the perspective of the artisans and make sure that in every conversation and dialogue, they are part of it.
Thanks, Anya. I totally, it's really more a collaborative effort from the government and also your organization, right, to work on this together. I know there are already movements in that area, encouraging people to be part of, let's say, a committee of designers and educators and even policymakers, so that we can create a centralized, resource center for that and push for our industry further. Now, I wanted to ask you, I know we're pretty much close to our cap, but given that all of this, and we are coming from different backgrounds as well, and really beautiful insights from all of you, I just wanted to ask about your thoughts on, let's say you are trying to project for the future. Is there anything that you would actually want to ask for? We have a variety of attendees here, and Senator Legarda was mentioning to us earlier, all of these efforts that she's doing would also require a lot of support. And we are here to, support. What are the things that we can ask for our audience now, or the general public who may be coming from different industries, like in STEAM and science, tech, engineering, and the arts, right? And even in the government. what would you guys want to ask from them specifically, especially the younger ones?
Um, is it for the textile industry? You mean, Carla, for the textile industry?
Yes,
Yeah.
you personally coming from your background, what would you ask from them? And I wanted to direct this to different categories, but mainly the younger generation, maybe
Right.
Gen Y, Gen Z, who are forming our future.
Yeah. You're right about how there are a lot of active organizations like the Habi Textile Foundation, the Filipino Fashion Council, who are really working together collaboratively to push for policy and to help define how we can push policy forward in terms of protecting our artisan communities and also in terms of the continuous revival of the industry. But in terms of like seeking support from the younger generation, I think what's there to ask is one, to really be critical, practice critical thinking and be very conscious in the way we consume our materials culture. I would admit humbly that even our organization is learning a lot and still has a lot to learn. And we're very fortunate that the space we are in has as a teaching culture, has a learning culture. I think it's very important for the younger generation to take responsibility and ownership of what identity means to us in terms of our weaves, and really take the time to understand what the patterns mean to our indigenous communities and to be respectful of how it's used, to always ask the question where our clothes are made or where our fabrics are made, how it's made and who made them, and really honor artisans, and also be respectful of ensuring that when we pursue creative opportunities, that we ensure that the artisans are actually able to have fair wages and also are able to kind of grow their capacity, grow their skills, and have the opportunities to empower themselves. I think given that there's so much diversity in skills and talents from different sectors, as you said, science, environment, the arts, I think that it would be amazing if we can all kind of find common ground and see how we can use our skills and our strengths to really be able to support the growth of our weaving industry in a manner that we make it known to the world. I think that that recognition will really open opportunities for our weaving culture and also our artisans.
Right. Thanks, Anya. For Santa Ricardo, given that you are seeing all of this happening now, and you have actually started this, you've carved the path for us. You've done so many things. If there was like a wish list for you, for the younger generation, what would you ask from them?
Thank you very much. First, my wish is that there would be a weaving center based on the resources available in that municipality, city, or province. But it would be best with 1,600 LGUs, 1,600 weaving centers, or more than one in one LGU, whether supported by government, PhilFIDA, PTRI, NCCA, or even private sector, because that would mean livelihood for our rural folks, boys, girls, men, or women. It would also perpetuate and immortalize the crafts that have been there for generations. And that is much needed now, especially during times of pandemic. So aside from the building of weaving centers, it would be great to have natural dye centers so that we can also plant, let's say, tayum, which is the source of indigo, so that we would have more, and use mahogany. We have although that is not a native tree, but there are many natural sources of natural dye, which is good because they would need to plant. At the same time, they would learn a very simple skill of using our plants for natural dye. And these can actually be local tourism destinations to have 1,000 weaving centers and natural dye centers bloom around the country. That would bring about rural livelihoods. And for people, for the youth, for everyone to buy their products. Like in Antique, there's not just one weaving center. I set up one in Bugasong, in Tibiao, in Pandan. But during this time, it's the market. So I end up, my house is like a kultura or like a tesoros, or it's bagsakan ng gulay, bagsakan ng prutas, at bagsakan din ng mga produkto. I mean, how many pandan weaves can I have? How many? And it's not just that. Even my tutups, it's at ba? My tutups, let's say, from, I call them my alagas, from Cebu to Island in Tawi-Tawi. Wala silang kabuhayan ngayon. So, I buy from them a dozen or what, I give it as gifts, food covers, it's beautiful. But if more people would buy, and if the pricing could be reasonable, not made very unreachable and expensive, then that would be a great contribution. I've done my part. I will continue, and I commit. I will build more weaving centers. I will build more natural dye centers. I will help them plant more cotton so that we don't have to import cotton from China, India, or Vietnam, or wherever, because Philippine cotton is good. And we will plant more abaca, banana, and other natural sources of fabric so that we can have a burgeoning or a revival of our natural fabrics from our plants. So that is my long answer to your short question, and my dream and my request is, in anyone's humble capacity, to help our rural women find jobs and increase their income during these times of pandemic by giving a handloom, which is just 5,000-10,000 pesos, giving the threads and giving the vats, let's say, for the natural dye, and buying their products. At the same time, linking them to markets and linking them, which I do, to the agencies of government to help them in terms of their quality, like CITEM, DCP, Design Center of the Philippines, and all of that. So I wish I could replicate me if there could be 100 more who could do what I'm doing, like what Anya and all the others are doing. That would really be great. Then we could provide them rural livelihoods, which they need so badly, especially during these days. So,
Carla,
yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, Hunter. Carla, I just wanted to add, picking up from what Senator Lawrence said and the emphasis on markets and linkage to markets, I think one of the things that maybe could be a potential output that our younger generation, including me, can work on in terms of a wish list is really being able to invest in infrastructure in the weaving communities, because accessibility to markets require technology nowadays, especially given the COVID, right? Like, we're not able to access face-to-face markets. What really contributed to the boom of the industry is the existence of bazaars and fairs like the Habi Fair, Artefino, Katutubo, and that contributed so much in the business or the market demand of our weaves. But given that now we're limited to doing things online, I think it's so important that we're able to build the capacity of our weaving communities to learn digital skills and also have the technology or the infrastructure to support access to network. If I'm a weaver and I don't have internet connection or a smartphone, how am I able to actually sell my product and sell my weaves? So I think that's very important. If we could design an app that would also facilitate traceability and transparency, wherein markets can have direct linkages to a nanay weaver, that would be awesome. Then we wouldn't have to go through so much middlemen and so much brands, and the communities or the artisans themselves can learn to really grow their business skills and learn how to provide customer service and connect to their customers directly. So there's so much opportunity. And we just want to always put the weavers or the artisans in the equation because they are obviously the source of these beautiful textiles. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Anya. I like what you guys were talking about, that you were actually covering the entire value chain, right? You are very much into the manufacturing processes from the production part and given the manpower. And Senator Legarda is also pushing for these infrastructures that really support these organizations and individuals all the way to retail. You were talking about like a go-to-market strategy of how to bring that to the actual market, needing, let's say, technology, the help of technology. And what I like about all of this is it can actually be sustainable. The things that you're pushing for, it's aiming for a sustainable process, right? It's something that we can really push forward within our country. We don't have to go outside. Um, with education, and I would like to transfer this to Prof. Kareem, because in a way, education would tie it all together, given that in every stage, you would have to educate every player in that value chain, right? Given that you are working with young minds and you are in the power also to shift their mindset, how are you currently doing that, and how are they responding to it? And of course, following, of course, with your wish list, if you can ask for a wish from this generation.
Yeah. Actually, my wish for this generation is for them to use their time well while they're hunkering down in their homes. Yeah. Not to get too distracted with, technology, whether that's video games or watching Netflix or, and the like. Because just by this, evidenced by this talk that we have right now, there's so much to learn about our country, about our being who we are. I mean, just the textile alone, the story of our textile alone, it took us almost like an hour and a half. And here we have experts who really know what's happening and are able to put together design, business, and technology. So, because that's what I'm teaching right now, at the AIM. How do we actually make precisely our STEAM professionals, scientists, engineers, people in technology, to look at our culture because it really matters. And also as a world art teacher, I'm a humanities teacher, art appreciation, and we look at not just the Philippines but the world. I think it's also important that we we look at our country in a very singular way, and I don't know how it's going to be, I don't know how we will be able, especially in the education sector, to really emphasize the importance of what is ours. Because the truth is, there's also just so much to know. I don't know if you guys, for sure, you've seen it, the 10-volume Cultural Center of the Philippines Encyclopedia that is so full of information about our culture, both our intangible culture and also our intangible culture. So that's language, dance, music, also textile, body art, etc., etc. And as Senator Legarda was saying, these even have subtopics because our ethno-linguistic groups that are 100 each have their own language, like sub-language dialects, even their theories about beauty is very it's said in a very cognitive or intellectual way, and I remember that art historian Alice Guillermo would say that Philippine art is actually very cognitive, that it really should appeal to the intellect, and it really does not always have the wow factor. Why? Because our colors are subdued, ours are incised, like ornamentation. No, so so our textiles are there, our pottery is there, our and many others, no, our jeepney even. It's really like clear evidence, no, of our who we are as Filipinos, and there's just so much to learn and so much to know, and our youth should rethink, no, the way they use their resources, whether that's their time, their energy, and ask themselves, am I really in things that matter? What really matters today? No? And I think there's already that restlessness that's happening in among the netizens, no? Filipino netizens. So they're always asking questions about, I don't know, related to being Filipino or about our culture. And some of them even get angry when they hear criticism from other, I don't know, from other cultures. You know, and they think they're misunderstood. Yeah, but then I think there is a lack of ways of articulating it. So, and for you to be able to articulate, you should have knowledge. So, I always remind my students to study, you know, and use reason and not just the feelings, because many of our, our cultural products aren't aren't so spectacular. No, they're not loud. They're very subdued. And Alice Villarmo at the end of the day would say that it really reflects our quiet dignity as Filipinos. And we should be proud of that because, you know, we're not, that is the study of being Filipino, and it's actually reflected in our art. Whether that's Jose Blanco or Bottom Francisco, and now we're talking about, you know, our textile weavers who in their own right are artists themselves. You know, they're hard workers, but at the same time they're very creative. So I think these young Filipinos should, at this time of the pandemic, really rethink what their values are and what matters. Because and as adults, the parents, the teachers should facilitate, you know, that ambiance of learning, especially now that we're in our homes. You know, maybe if they see one, you know, their children really so engrossed in I don't know what video games and too much of consumption of foreign media products. We should ask ourselves, what about our things? What about our values? What about our art? No, do we get into this? Otherwise, then we lose something that's very important to us. And I think the senator had already expounded on that, and also Anya. See, the passion is there because we understand the vital importance, no? Vital na important pa, of these values, no? And the attention that we give to what is beautiful for us. It's just that we've lost touch. And many of these kids, I mean, I'm not generalizing, but as you know, as a teacher for 23 years, and I've always been with high schoolers, I've always been with college students, and now I'm teaching in a graduate school. Sometimes even the graduate school students, the millennials, are getting distracted by products that are not theirs, you see. So the question is, how do we bring back the consciousness to things Filipino? And not just the consciousness, but that how do we teach them to have that passion, that love, you know, for what is theirs? And I think from there, then we are on our way to better nation building, you know, because some of us have already begun, you know, and I would like to acknowledge the work of Senator Ligarda and Anya, you know, in their in textile industry, and also our textile culture. And yeah, there's so much to know. And textile is just one, but look at the depth by which we've discussed this. And some are not even at the surface level. So it's sad, but there's always hope, yeah. So
Yeah, and
as
ask the right
teachers, we
question.
never need hope.
Yeah. really ask the right questions, right? Like you were mentioning, ask the right questions, get involved. And we are coming from various industries. If you guys are listening, guys and gals out there, you can get involved. Just feel free to reach out. We can always refer you to the right people. And we always need more to really campaign for this to happen. Again, it wouldn't happen if people are not as proactive like these wonderful women with me today. Before I close, I would like to ask for maybe some last few words from Senator DeGarda and also Anya and Dr. Corinne, if you have anything else to add. Shall I give the floor to Senator?
Yes, in closing, I would just like to get everyone interested in cultural mapping because that's been my advocacy also for decades. And that's what we're doing in Antique as well. Because while we're speaking about textile, it just is a speck in the whole universe of who we are as Filipinos and what comprises our built heritage or our tangible and intangible heritage. If we are able to do cultural mapping in every municipality and city, and there are many LGUs that have done it, then we will be able to appreciate what we have. And when we know what we have, we will be able to take pride in it and to protect it. So again, I go to a bill that I filed way back in the Senate that mandates cultural mapping of every city and municipality in our country. LGUs are sometimes doing it on their own, but to have a law that would mandate this. And all I can commit is next year, after the elections, gagawin ko yan. I've been wanting to do that, one thing at a time. First, I want the blossoming of weaving centers and natural dye centers. And when I say weaving, it's not just textile weaving. It's also baskets. It's also mats. Ang dami eh. And it's not just abaka in piña. It could be tikog, it could be barrio, it could be andame, pandan. There's a wealth of resources na libre sa bundok and people need jobs. So just give them tools and the know-how and the market and we can help people earn for food on the table. But cultural mapping would be able to help the youths, the millennials understand more of what is the Filipino culture in their community. It's so interesting. Just like what the former mayor of Giwan had done. And when Yolanda happened, the first thing she tried to rescue was the byproduct of the cultural mapping that was done. Right now, we are training our trainers in Antique for cultural mapping with the NCCA so that there could be a cultural map of the whole province as well. By the way, Antique is such a wealthy province in terms of culture in every respect. So there's no time. I thought you were just 1 hour and I'm so glad I'm able to get into the room after having difficulty with the technology. But thank you so much to Sofa Design. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Dr. Corinne. Thank you, Anya, for having me and all of those online.
Thank you so much, Senator. And definitely the fruits of your labor are actually, coming out there, especially now. With regards to the cultural mapping, we are attending a creative economy mapping in Makati sometime next week to be able to, effectively create a national design policy. So we have you and a lot of people who are really our trailblazers to thank for that. And we are crossing our fingers that we can continue this and maybe onboard more people. So you guys have anything to add, Anya and Dr. Corinne, before I close?
Anya, go ahead.
Thank you. I think I just really would like to, appreciate SOFA for integrating identity, Filipino identity and branding, and also textile knowledge of our weaving culture into the curriculum, because it's very valuable that we, engage the younger generation in continuous education. And until we always believe that the continuity of our culture and our identity lies in the hands of the young, and what better way to do this, to facilitate this, but through education. So I think forums and discussions like this are very valuable, and I think we should continue the conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. Please do let us continue this conversation. After, the seminar, we do have two more episodes. I've learned so much also from the two of you, the three of you. So, Dr. Corinne, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
first I would like to thank Sofa for inviting me to this very, very engaging talk, no, and a forum on textile, because I must admit that that's a part of my Philippine art history that I need to, indulge in more. So I really learned a lot, and I think this discussion would help in also enhancing and enriching our course, Carla, in SOFA, which is a Branding Things Filipino. I'm already teaching that at the Asian Institute of Management, but we're now offering it for creatives and anyone who would like to brand their things in Filipino. So I think we're going to start in October, and so we're promoting that, and we're inviting you all to check it out. So again, thank you for my education today, Senator Legarda and Anya, and more power to you both. And thank you, Carla.
Thank you. I
so
learned
much.
from all of you. Good night. Thanks.
Thank you. So, in behalf of Asia Society Philippines and SOFA Design Institute, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today in our first episode that focuses on the Filipino identity and textiles woven through our culture. We have more in store for you. So, episode 2 is going to focus on the journey of textiles in Southeast Asia. And episode 3 is all about future proofing of our textiles. We have so many people who will be joining us for episode 2. We have Dr. Norma Respicio from the University of the Philippines, who's an expert at woven techniques. Ms. Maribel Ongpin of HABI, the Philippine Textile Council, representative of the Philippines to the ASEAN. And Ms. Maria Wawarontu, representative of Indonesia to the ASEAN. So on episode 3, we have Ms. Maria Esmeralda Palaganas, who's part of Basic Movement, Ms. Emmy Englis, who is part of the Philippine Fashion Council, and Mr. Mike Laparols, who is also part of the Philippine Fashion Council. So just all you have to do is log in every Wednesday at 5 o'clock p.m. That's September 8th. That's today, September 15 and 22. And it will be streamed on Asia Society Philippines Facebook and YouTube accounts, as well as SOFA Design Institute's accounts. So thank you again so much. I am honored to join you today. Let's continue this conversation forward even after this webinar. Thank you, everyone. Good night.